Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and I'm so glad you're here. Each week, you're going to find practical lessons here on the show about cueing, sequencing, and building the mindset of an empowered yoga teacher. My goal is to help you step into every class with the knowledge you need, the confidence to make your own decisions, and the ability to trust yourself as a teacher. Let's get started. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 414. I had to just take a look there to just note what number we're at. And I'm recording this on July 23rd, and this will go live on July 27th, 2026. Today, I'm going to be talking about injuries and some common injuries that you may hear about from your students and a way to approach these conversations so that you can feel confident and helpful, but in a collaborative way, not in a way that a lot of yoga teachers think, which is, I need to have all the answers. I need to be the answer person. And I want to tell you the inspiration for this comes from a video I made last week on my social media, where I talked about that question that a lot of teachers ask at the beginning of class, which is, does anybody have any injuries? And I talked about it in the video from the point of view of, is that question asked at that time in that forum really going to give you information that can help you help the person? Number one, you're asking it at the beginning of class in front of other people. Does that provide somebody with the confidential space, the confidentiality to be able to share? Number two, does anybody else in the class really want to sit there and listen to somebody else's personal situation? I don't think so. Number three, you're cutting into time that you could be teaching. And number four, and most importantly, in that situation, when someone says what their injury is, how do you actually have time, enough information, or really just uh, something to say in that moment that's going to move the needle in any sort of significant way? The most you could probably say is, okay, thanks for letting me know, just take it easy or do what you can. And that to me is nice and well-intentioned, but it doesn't really give the person something that they can sink their teeth into. And so I think the first problem with that whole situation and addressing it in that way is that it doesn't really give you as the teacher an opportunity to really share something meaningful with the student, nor does it help you to learn more about the details to any sort of level as to what's actually going on with this person, because you can't take up the time of everybody else while the person goes into detail. Now, I'm going to just take a little sidebar here. When I originally made the video number one, where I presented the thought on this as I've just presented it to you now, I then decided to make a follow-up video to provide a little bit more guidance for teachers around what you could do instead. And that's what I'm going to go into in more detail today. But in that follow-up video, I talked about an approach that I think is way more helpful, which is to ask the question, how does it affect your movement? So in other words, the student comes up to you and says, here's what's going on. Or maybe if you do choose to ask this question at the beginning of class, the student raises their hand, they tell you what the injury is, and then you immediately come back with, can you tell me how that affects your movement? And the reason I think this is way more helpful is because now you get information that's within your zone of professional scope of practice, because the person's going to say, oh, well, this affects my shoulder movement, or, oh, well, this makes it hard for me to bend at the hips, bend forward and touch my toes. So now you're actually talking about movement, which is your area of expertise, rather than something else, which is more medical or clinical, or having you feel like you have to know exactly what the condition is. Because let's face it, your students are going to tell you about injuries they have, and you're not going to know anything about that injury. You're not going to know what it is. You're not going to know what the treatment is. You're not going to know even what the etymology is, like the cause of that injury is. And so this is where teachers often feel like they need to be the answer people. But my premise to you is you don't need to be the answer person. You need to lean into your professional scope of practice, which is you're a movement professional. You're a yoga teacher. So why not shift the focus of the conversation from this is my clinical diagnoses to this is how it affects my movement? Because I can tell you, as someone who has clinical expertise and who teaches anatomy, everybody's clinical diagnoses does not mean that everybody presents the same way. So a herniated disc at L5 is going to present differently from person to person. So the diagnoses alone doesn't even really help you. And just as an interesting sidebar, I got a comment on the first video I did, and a teacher really came at me hard and said, I think this is awful advice. I always ask at the beginning of my classes if anybody has any injuries. She went into a little bit about her background and extensive experience as a yoga teacher and the style of yoga she teaches, which I think was Iyengar. And she was really, really concerned that I was suggesting that people not ask their students at the beginning of class if they have an injury. And she even went so far as to say that it was, I don't think she literally used the word irresponsible, but she basically said, this is really bad advice, and I think you should reconsider your profession. So she was basically saying to me, I'm not qualified to be a yoga teacher because this advice is so poor. And I want to just bring that up because, I think whenever I suggest something or share a point of view or share something in my teaching methodology or question something that is very well established as a method within yoga world. And I would say asking students at the beginning of class if they have any injuries has been going on for over 50 years. I mean, I don't know why I'm saying 50 years. For over 20 years. I've been teaching for 20 years, right? And it's probably been going on longer. And I always find it curious when somebody is really triggered by what I'm suggesting that goes counter or suggests a different approach to something that's been done in a particular way for many, many years, because that to me is a sign that somebody is not looking for other ways to do things. Somebody is really, really dug into there's only one right way. And I don't think that is true at all. And so I just bring that up to you because I want you to always keep an open mind to question authority, whatever authority looks like in yoga world, to question the information you're getting from yoga teachers, to use your own mind, your own brain, your own research, and to lean into what you want to do. What rationale do you have for what you're doing? And is it consistent with how you want to show up? If this person wants to ask their students at the beginning of class, does anybody have any injuries? Great, do it. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying I don't think it gets the results you want. And I also logistically think it's a complete waste of time for everybody else in the class to have to sit there and listen to everybody else's injury. But again, if you want to do that, go ahead and do it, right? I don't hold myself out there as somebody who's in charge of the yoga world. I'm definitely not. But I definitely question a lot of stuff that's been going on for many, many years. And I think a lot of yoga teachers defer their own personal agency and their own personal sense of authority to somebody else simply because that person maybe has been teaching longer than them. Or maybe in their eyes, that person, quote, knows what they're doing, right? Whatever it is. So I just encourage you to step into your own power, to be an empowered yoga teacher, to do things the way you want to do them, not willy-nilly, but with your own rationale for why you're doing whatever you're doing, how you're doing it, right? Maybe you want to start your class and say to people, hey, going forward, if you ever have any injuries, let me know before class. Maybe you want to greet people as they're setting up their mat and just ask them, hey, super glad you're here. Just wanted to check in with you and see if anything was going on that you'd like to share with me. Right? Like that to me is a much better forum to have a meaningful conversation with somebody. Now, having said that, I wanted to go even a third step further. And so I created two other videos. So now we're up to 4 videos on this subject matter. So if you've missed any of these, go to my Instagram or my TikTok. So I made a fourth video, a third and fourth video, and I presented 2 green screens where I wrote out an outline so you could see it on the video. And the first one was, and this is what I'm going to walk you through today, a list of common injuries that you're going to hear about in your classes. And I'll explain to you how I pulled these particular ones on this list. And then the next one goes into a little bit more of the conversation around the framework that you can use to guide your conversations with students when they bring up injuries. So let's first talk about what are the common injuries you're most likely going to hear about when you ask people or when you ask somebody, just wanted to check in with you, you got any injuries that you'd like to share with me? Or even if you don't ask that, just people coming up to you and telling you about injuries, probably going to fall into one of these buckets. So, and let me just also say, because I have a background in personal training and corrective exercise from NASM, which is the National Academy of Sports Medicine, totally different industry than yoga world. Um, they are the industry that is grounded in science, exercise science, and they have the data around a whole host of things, including common injury types across the population, incidence of these injury types, and detail to a level that we just don't have in the yoga industry. So because I have that in my background, I have certifications from NASM. I went to the NASM data to pull this information. So I wanted to just tell you the source data for where this is coming from. So when we look out at the population, 2 common injury types stand out. And these are all things we're talking about within the musculoskeletal system. I'm not talking cardiovascular, I'm not talking endocrine, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because our primary role as movement professionals is the musculoskeletal system. Absolutely, the body is a system. Absolutely, there are other systems that we're going to hear about from people that tell us they have lupus or people that tell us they have rheumatoid arthritis or whatever. But we have to put the perimeter for this conversation around something. And so it makes total sense to focus on the musculoskeletal system. So when we look at the musculoskeletal system, the common injury types are sprains and strains. Sprains are stretching or tearing of a ligament, and strains are injuries to muscles or tendons. Now, for this conversation, I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail around what is a ligament, what is a tendon, right? I'm going to just proceed forward. I want you to listen to this conversation and see if it brings up for you a feeling of, I don't really feel like I know what she's talking about. I wish I had a better handle on this stuff. And that's a sign that you're ready to kind of, or at least you're curious about filling in that anatomy learning gap. So I want you to just have that hat on as you're listening to this conversation. So common injuries, sprains and strains, and you can distinguish them because sprains are regarding stretching or tearing of a ligament. Strains are injuries to muscles or tendons. Now, regions for injury that are most common. Number 1, foot and ankle complex. This definitely comes up in older individuals that lose balance. Balance is a skill that we lose over time. This also can be related to people who are doing other things like basketball, soccer, where there's a lot of lateral movement involved that creates lateral instability in the ankle. The number 2, these aren't necessarily ranked in order, but the second region for injury that is common is the knee. You'll see things like and hear things, not see things, you'll hear things from students around diagnoses like patellar tendonitis, meniscal damage, and ACL tears. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but these all have to do with connective tissue structures within the joint, as well as overuse injuries, because tendonitis is an overuse injury. The next category of injuries falls into the lower back region. We're talking here about lumbar muscle strains and mechanical lower back pain, which can be related to postural problems, can be related to biomechanics of lifting things, stuff like that. Then you have shoulder issues, which most often are going to sound like diagnoses including rotator cuff tears, rotator cuff injuries, or again, tendonitis. And then the last category is the lower leg. So shin splints and Achilles tendonitis. These are two conditions, diagnoses that are definitely found in runners, because they are both overuse injuries related to running, but could be related to other things. And again, not going to get into the details of what they are, but those are the names of the diagnoses. Now, we have a third category of general injuries or conditions. And these are definitely things you're going to hear about as well. Although I will say the person may not classify this by its diagnostic name as I'm giving to you now, but there are things they're going to present with that are going to give you a clue that they might have one of these problems. Let me also just say as a disclaimer, it is not within your professional scope of practice to diagnose anyone, but as you get more familiar with understanding anatomy and its application to movement, you will inevitably be able to start to recognize these things by having conversations with students and hearing about the problems they're having. So the first thing is overuse injuries. So we've already talked about some of these things. We're talking here about tendonitis, sprains, or strains. Another category is underuse injuries, which I also call a student who might be deconditioned. So this is someone who has poor range of motion, ROM, lack of strength. So this, just as a further example, might be someone, let's say a woman in her late 60s who hasn't exercised for 10 years. She comes to your yoga class, she's going to start yoga, and she can't do something like plank without feeling like it's a tremendous effort, right? So that's a person that doesn't necessarily have anything wrong with their joints, wrong with their muscles, but they just have a general challenge of decondition, being a deconditioned person. Another category here is impingement. Impingement can be bone on bone. It could be soft tissue, bone to soft tissue. So a common presentation might be someone has shoulder bursitis, which is the compression of the bursa in the shoulder, usually out in the acromial area there. I know I'm getting into a lot of details here, but again, just as you're hearing this conversation, just notice what's coming up for you. Like, are you listening to this and thinking, oh, I'm totally nailing this. I totally get what she's talking about. Are you listening to this thinking, I don't understand these terms? Are you listening to this thinking, wow, this is really interesting. I wish I had a better handle on this kind of stuff. Like, just notice what's coming up for you. And then the last scenario in this general injuries bucket is DOMS or general soreness. So DOMS is delayed onset muscle soreness, and it's something that happens after you exercise really hard. You have that 24-hour post-hard exercise general soreness. So your students that come to you that say, oh, I'm training for a marathon, I feel generally sore, or I just started this workout routine and I'm doing yoga on my off days, but I feel generally sore. Like, that's who we're talking about here. So it's always good in those conversations to ask people, what other things are you doing for fitness and exercise besides coming to my yoga classes? So now that we've gone through the different scenarios, diagnoses, conditions, let's talk about the framework for having the conversation. So the first question obviously is, tell me what the injury is. Now, when the person says what the injury is, the next decision point is, do you know about that injury? Do you know what that is? Because if you know what it is, then your knowledge about that injury is going to inform where the conversation goes next. But if you don't know what that diagnosis is, then you can't really go further unless you have another approach to continuing the conversation. And that's what I'm going to share with you here. Now, again, I want to just put this disclaimer in. It is outside the yoga teacher's scope of practice to treat, to make recommendations for treatment, or to diagnose a student. I was just talking to a teacher the other day in email, and she said, oh, and I recommended the person go see an orthopedic surgeon. Well, guess what? That's outside your professional scope of practice. You know, teachers recommending Advil or teachers recommending Reiki or I mean, it seems innocuous, and I don't know, do it if you feel like it's something you want to do. But truly, our role as teachers is not diagnose, treat, make recommendations. That's outside our professional role. So I just want to, again, make that disclaimer. Now, let's talk about whether you know about their injury or you don't. How can you further this conversation? So, as I said earlier, in my view, the best question you can ask is, how does the injury affect your movement? How does the injury affect your movement? And I want to stress again, when they tell you the injury and you say, thanks for letting me know, how does this affect your movement? I want you to see how you're not on the hot seat. You're not the answer person. You're now asking them a question. Then they're going to respond. Then you're going to respond. So now you're collaborating. And I want you to see how powerful that is, what a powerful shift that is, because a lot of teachers commented to my first video on this subject saying, I don't ask that question because I'm terrified as to what I'm going to hear. And I'm going to hear stuff where I can't be helpful because I don't understand those diagnoses. So other comments came through. Thanks so much for bringing this up. I feel like I now have permission to not ask that question. And, you know, this is why, number one, what a shame that anatomy is so poorly taught out there in yoga world, that teachers are out there teaching terrified to ask people about their injuries. That's a reflection on that as far as I'm concerned. And number two, I'm not saying avoid the question, but it again is a reflection on just the lack of support that teachers get around anatomy and movement and the application of movement to teaching. So here in this reframe, in this question, I'm recommending or suggesting or offering that you can ask people, the whole paradigm has shifted. You're no longer the answer person. You're the yoga teacher. They're the person. They're the student. I mean, I don't mean that in a hierarchical way, but you're the yoga teacher. They're the person asking you a question who's taking your class, and now you're collaborating towards a common goal of finding a way that this person can take your class and be comfortable despite their injury. I want you to see how that's a total shift. It is a collaboration. It's not you having all the information, because I don't care how long you're teaching yoga, you're never going to know all the ins and outs of every diagnosis that a student presents you with. You're just not. So you need something better than that. You need something more generally applicable. This is why so much of the work I do is to create generally applicable frameworks that teachers can apply in a whole host of situations, whether it's cueing or sequencing, in this case, having conversations about injury. So here you ask this question, how does the injury affect your movement? And then you consider the student's answer in the context of yoga poses in your sequence. So as I said earlier, ideally you're having this conversation with them in private, or maybe like in hushed tones in the room before class starts. And you can have a one-on-one conversation with them. So they're going to answer the question, and now you're thinking about the poses you're going to be presenting in your sequence that day, and you can make recommendations based on that. So let's say the person says to you, just want to let you know, I have a herniated disc at L5. And you say, thanks, Joe. Thanks for letting me know about that. I'm sorry that you're dealing with this injury right now. Can you let me know, how does it affect your movement? Well, Karen, it affects my movement in that when I bend down to touch my toes, like tie my shoes or pick up the dog's bowl in the morning, I feel really stiff in the lower back. So now I'm hearing that from Joe, and I'm thinking, well, I know we're going to do a lot of sun salutations in this class, and it's going to require a lot of hip flexion, i.e. bending down to touch the toes. So that informs what I now say to Joe. Okay, well, just want to let you know, We're going to be doing sun salutations in the beginning of class. That involves forward folding. Why don't you just stay on your feet and just do the warriors as we do them? So this to me is like so much more of a helpful conversation to have. Now you're going to think about whatever comes up for you in regards to your sequence and the conversations you're having with people in your class. Now, the other opportunity you have there is to offer modifications that take into consideration the limitations the person has in movement. So this is the time that you can suggest to them, hey, when we get to crescent lunge, do it with your knee down. When we get to half pigeon, hug your knees into your chest or whatever it is, okay? Now, I want you to also I want you to also consider that a general framework for offering modifications is to decrease the ask from a range of motion perspective. So again, I'm just going to broad brush it. This is the kind of thing I teach inside my program. But generally speaking, what I'm talking about here is the range of motion is the expression of the anatomical movement from a particular joint. So let's say I have somebody who, let me think of let's say I have somebody who has limited range of motion in the shoulders, and it's hard for them to bring their shoulders into full flexion. So what pose that we do a lot has full shoulder flexion, bilateral shoulder flexion? So that's warrior one. Chair, right? So if you're teaching any kind of vinyasa flow, you're going to teach those two poses, and they both have bilateral shoulder flexion. So this person is telling you, I have a problem. I can't reach up. Maybe they have rotator cuff tear. Maybe they have rotator cuff injury. Maybe they have shoulder tendonitis. Maybe they have bursitis. Maybe they have impingement. So range of motion for them is limited. They can't do full shoulder flexion to 120 degrees. Maybe they can only do shoulder flexion to 90 degrees. So what modification can you offer them for chair and warrior one that doesn't require bilateral shoulder flexion to full range of motion? Well, you can just have them bring their hands to their heart, or you can have them just bring their shoulders to 90 degrees, reach their arms out in front of them and hold a block. So I want you to see how I'm taking what the person's saying and I'm applying anatomical concepts to movement. This is another level. This is not memorizing anatomy. This is applying anatomy. This is what yoga teachers miss in so many of the trainings that are happening all over the world. Like teachers tell me, even this week, I heard yet another crazy story from a yoga teacher who, in her 200-hour training, they just had like a couple of hours of anatomy taught by an orthopedic surgeon. And it was so clinical, she said it was completely above their heads. So, what I'm sharing with you is application of anatomy to movement in yoga teaching. This is a niche level of anatomy knowledge, a specific skill, a specific way to apply anatomy to teaching. This is exactly what I teach in my programs. So again, as you listened to this episode, what was coming up for you? Oh, I totally know this. I feel great about doing this. Oh my God, this makes me more nervous. Wow, she's using a lot of terms I don't really get. Boy, I really wish I could feel more confident having these conversations. So notice what comes up for you, because remember, when you are at the point, and it could be now, I mean, you might be listening to this episode saying to yourself, I'm ready to go. I am ready to enroll in Karen's program because I want to be the kind of teacher who has a high degree of confidence around having conversations with yoga teachers, with yoga students around injuries. And in general, I just want to feel more confident. And I was one of those teachers who had a really poor experience in my 200-hour training around learning anatomy. So, obviously you're not here with me, so I can't assess how you're taking this all in. But, in the show notes, you will see links to my programs and you can check those out and see a little bit more about them. Obviously, reach out to me if you have any questions, but I am here to help you get to where you want to be. And today's conversation about working with students who have injuries is just one piece of how I can help you. So we're going to wrap this one up. Again, check the show notes for associated links to these programs. And I hope you found this helpful and interesting. And you can always just drop me a line on social media and let me know what stood out to you from this episode. I would sure appreciate it. And I'll just give you just a disclaimer that I don't use any AI or any automated replies in any of my social media. So if you write to me, I am writing to you back. It is not an AI agent. All right. Thank you so much for being here and listening to the end. And I will chat with you next week on the next episode of Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Namaste. Thanks so much for listening. Before you go, think about what stood out to you in today's episode. If something sparked a new idea or got you thinking differently about your teaching, feel free to send me a DM. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're ready to move forward as a teacher, I've created a few ways to support you. There's the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator, where you'll learn how to apply anatomy to cueing and sequencing. The Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, my one-to-one program, where you'll get personalized support to develop into the teacher you truly want to be. And the Mindset Method, a program that will help you discover proven ways to feel more confident teaching. You'll find the links to each one of these programs on my website, barebonesyoga.com, and it's also in the link in my social media bio on TikTok or Instagram. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.